Sometimes the person a child trusts the most is the one nobody else even notices. The grand foyer of the Harrington estate shimmered beneath a crystal chandelier imported from Italy. Sunlight poured through towering windows nearly 20 feet high, reflecting off polished marble floors that stretched across the mansion like sheets of white glass. Everything about the house spoke of wealth. The paintings on the walls were worth more than most families would earn in a lifetime. Fresh flowers arrived every morning from the finest florist in Manhattan. A fleet of luxury vehicles waited outside behind iron gates guarded by stone pillars. Yet on that particular afternoon, none of those things mattered. 7-year-old Maya Brooks stood quietly in the center of the foyer, holding a small backpack against her chest. The little girl had arrived only hours earlier. She was still trying to understand how her life had changed so quickly. Just a few weeks ago, she had been living with the woman who loved her more than anyone in the world. Now she found herself standing inside a mansion that felt larger than some schools she had visited. Around her, 10 carefully selected nanny candidates waited in a line. Each woman wore elegant professional clothing. Their resumes had been reviewed by agencies. Their references had been verified. Some spoke multiple languages. Others had years of experience caring for children from influential families. Richard Harrington stood a few feet away, watching the scene unfold. At 45 years old, the billionaire businessman was accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of people. Yet nothing in his corporate career had prepared him for becoming responsible for a little girl who had suddenly entered his life through a promise he had made to a dear friend. Richard adjusted the cuff of his tailored navy suit and offered Maya a gentle smile. "Take your time," he said. "You can choose whoever makes you feel most comfortable." The candidates immediately brightened. Several smiled warmly. One knelt slightly to appear more approachable. Another introduced herself with practiced confidence. Maya listened politely. She looked at each face, one by one. Slowly, carefully. The room remained silent except for the faint ticking of a grandfather clock near the staircase. Richard expected her to choose one of the women standing before her. Everyone else expected the same thing. Instead, Maya surprised them all. Without saying a word, she began walking past the line of candidates. One after another, she moved beyond every smiling face. Confused glances appeared around the room. The little girl continued toward the far corner of the foyer. There, partially hidden beside a rolling cleaning cart, stood a woman wearing a simple housekeeping uniform. Vanessa Carter had spent most of the afternoon dusting furniture and organizing fresh flowers. She had not expected to be involved in the meeting. In fact, she was trying very hard not to draw attention to herself. When she noticed Maya approaching, she looked around uncertainly. The child stopped directly in front of her. Then she reached out and gently took Vanessa's hand. "I choose her," Maya said softly. The entire room froze. One nanny candidate blinked in disbelief. Another exchanged a puzzled glance with the house manager. Richard stared at the little girl for several seconds, convinced he had misunderstood. Vanessa herself looked completely stunned. "Me?" she asked quietly. Maya nodded. "Yes." Richard stepped forward. "Maya, these women are nanny candidates," he explained gently. "Vanessa works here as part of the housekeeping staff." Maya looked up at him with calm certainty. Then she said something nobody in that mansion would ever forget. "She was the only one who smiled at me before anyone was watching." For the rest of the afternoon, the atmosphere inside the Harrington estate felt strangely different. The line of nanny candidates eventually departed, carrying with them polite smiles and lingering confusion. Even after the front doors closed behind them, Maya's words remained suspended in the air like an unanswered question. "She was the only one who smiled at me before anyone was watching." Richard found himself replaying the sentence again and again. He had built companies by studying people. He understood negotiations, leadership, and human behavior better than most. Yet somehow, a 7-year-old girl had noticed something that every adult in the room had missed. As evening settled over Manhattan, golden sunlight filtered through the mansion's enormous windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Maya wandered quietly through hallways decorated with priceless artwork and elegant furniture. The estate was magnificent, but to her it felt unfamiliar. Every room seemed too large. Every ceiling seemed too high. The silence felt different from the home she had known before. Richard watched her from a distance. He recognized the look in her eyes. It was not fear. It was loneliness. The kind that could exist even when surrounded by luxury. Meanwhile, Vanessa continued working as though nothing unusual had happened. She replaced fresh flowers in crystal vases, folded linens, and checked guest rooms for the following week's visitors. Yet inside, she was still trying to understand what had happened. During her 5 years at the estate, she had become accustomed to being overlooked. Most guests never remembered her name. Many employees passed her in the hallways without a second glance. She did not complain. She simply did her work with quiet dignity. Then a little girl had walked past every qualified nanny in the house and chosen her. Near sunset, Maya found herself standing alone in the enormous library. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with thousands of books. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. She sat in a leather chair, hugging her knees, staring out the window toward the distant city skyline. A few minutes later, Vanessa entered carrying a stack of returned books. She immediately noticed the child sitting quietly by herself. Instead of asking questions, she simply sat in the chair nearby. Neither spoke for several moments. The city lights slowly began appearing beyond the glass. Finally, Vanessa smiled gently. "That is my favorite view in the whole house," she said. Maya glanced toward the window. "Mine too." The conversation was simple. No pressure. No childcare techniques. No carefully planned introductions. They talked about clouds that looked like animals, about favorite foods, about books with happy endings. As the minutes passed, Maya's shoulders relaxed. For the first time since arriving at the estate, she looked comfortable. Later that evening, Richard passed the library and stopped in the doorway. What he saw surprised him. Maya was laughing softly while Vanessa listened to one of her stories. The mansion that had felt empty all day suddenly felt warmer. Not because anything expensive had been added, because someone had finally made the little girl feel seen. And standing quietly in the hallway, Richard realized that despite all the resources at his disposal, the person helping Maya most was the one nobody had expected to matter at all. Over the following days, a quiet routine began to take shape inside the Harrington estate. Every morning, sunlight spilled across the eastern wing of the mansion, illuminating long hallways lined with family portraits and polished hardwood floors. House staff moved efficiently through their schedules, preparing meals, organizing meetings, and maintaining the flawless appearance of one of Manhattan's most impressive private residences. Yet amid all the order and luxury, one small change became impossible to ignore. Maya was no longer spending her days alone. Whenever Richard returned from meetings, he often found her near Vanessa. Sometimes they sat together in the library reading storybooks. Sometimes they worked on puzzles in the sunroom overlooking the gardens. Other times they simply talked while Vanessa folded laundry or arranged flowers. What surprised Richard most was how natural everything seemed. Vanessa never treated Maya like a responsibility. She treated her like a person. One rainy afternoon, Maya sat at the large kitchen island drawing with colored pencils while Vanessa prepared fresh chocolate chip cookies. The smell filled the entire room. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, warmth seemed to settle into every corner. Maya held up a drawing. "Do you think this looks like a castle?" Vanessa studied it seriously. "I think it looks like a castle where the queen has excellent taste in architecture." Maya laughed. "You always say funny things." Vanessa smiled. "Only when I am talking to interesting people." The little girl grinned and returned to her drawing. A few minutes later, Richard entered the kitchen unexpectedly. He paused near the doorway. Maya was smiling again. Not politely. Not briefly. Genuinely. The sight stopped him in his tracks. During the weeks since she had arrived, he had worried constantly about whether she would ever feel at home. The mansion offered every comfort money could buy, yet none of it seemed capable of reaching her heart. Somehow Vanessa had accomplished in days what expensive specialists and carefully planned arrangements had failed to do. That evening, Richard reviewed several reports in his home office. The city skyline glowed beyond the windows. Yet his attention kept drifting elsewhere. Finally, he opened Maya's school assessment file, which had arrived earlier that day. One page caught his eye. A teacher had written a short note several months before. Maya formed strong connections with people who listen before they speak. Richard sat quietly for a long moment. Then he remembered something else. The first day, the moment Maya had chosen Vanessa. She was the only one who smiled at me before anyone was watching. Suddenly the choice made perfect sense. Vanessa had never tried to impress Maya. She had never competed for attention. She had never spoken to her like a project to manage. She had simply been kind. Later that night, Maya wandered into the library carrying a blanket. She found Vanessa organizing books before the end of her shift. "Can I ask you something?" Maya said. "Of course." Maya hesitated. "When you first saw me, were you trying to make me feel better?" Vanessa thought for a moment. Then she shook her head gently. "No." Maya looked surprised. Vanessa knelt beside her. "I smile because I thought you might be having a hard day. And when people are having a hard day, kindness helps." For several seconds Maya stared at her. Then she quietly wrapped her arms around Vanessa. In that moment, neither of them noticed Richard standing silently in the hallway, watching, understanding, and realizing for the first time that the person helping Maya heal was not simply a housekeeper. She was becoming the one person in the mansion who truly made it feel like home. The transformation became impossible to ignore. By the middle of October, the atmosphere inside the Harrington estate felt entirely different from the day Maya had first arrived. The little girl who once wandered quietly through unfamiliar hallways now filled rooms with conversation and curiosity. She asked questions during breakfast. She shared stories at dinner. She spent afternoons exploring the gardens behind the mansion, collecting colorful leaves and inventing names for the squirrels that darted between the trees. Richard noticed every change. At first, he told himself it was simply a matter of time. Children adapted. That was what the experts always said. But deep down, he knew something else was happening. Every improvement seemed connected to one person. One Saturday morning, sunlight streamed through the conservatory windows while Maya worked on a puzzle spread across a large wooden table. Vanessa sat nearby arranging fresh flowers in crystal vases. Richard entered carrying a stack of documents from a business meeting. Before either woman noticed him, he paused to observe. Maya was concentrating on a difficult puzzle piece. After several unsuccessful attempts, frustration began to appear on her face. Immediately, Vanessa leaned closer. "Do you know what my mother used to tell me?" she asked. Maya shook her head. "She said difficult things are just easy things that have not happened yet." Maya thought about that for a moment. Then she smiled and tried again. This time the puzzle piece fit perfectly. Her face lit up with excitement. Richard watched the exchange silently. There had been no grand lesson, no professional technique, just patience, encouragement, belief. Later that afternoon, Maya accompanied Richard to a charity luncheon. The event took place in an elegant ballroom overlooking the Hudson River. Business leaders and philanthropists filled the room. Normally, such gatherings left Maya withdrawn and uncomfortable. Yet this time she carried herself differently. She greeted people politely. She answered questions with confidence. At one point she even laughed during a conversation. Several guests commented on how happy she seemed. Richard found himself wondering the same thing. That evening, after returning home, he discovered the answer in the most unexpected way. Maya sat in the library drawing at a small table near the fireplace. Richard joined her. "You seem happier lately," he said gently. Maya continued coloring for a moment before looking up. "I am." "Why?" The little girl considered the question carefully. Then she pointed toward the hallway where Vanessa had disappeared a few minutes earlier. "Because she listens." Richard smiled. "A lot of people listen." Maya shook her head. "Not like her." Her voice remained soft but certain. "Most people listen because they are waiting to talk. She listens because she wants to understand." Richard sat quietly. Maya returned to her drawing. After a moment she added one more sentence. "When I am with her, I do not feel like the girl everyone feels sorry for." The word struck him harder than he expected. Suddenly he understood what he had been witnessing for weeks. Vanessa was not changing Maya by solving her problems. She was changing her by reminding her that she was more than those problems. Outside, evening settled over Manhattan. Thousands of lights illuminated the skyline. Inside the library, Richard looked toward the hallway once more. For the first time, he stopped seeing Vanessa as an employee who happened to be helping Maya. He began seeing her as the reason Maya was finally learning how to smile again. As autumn deepened across New York City, Richard found himself noticing things he had overlooked for years. It began with small details. The way Maya searched for Vanessa whenever she entered a room. The way Vanessa remembered everyone's preferences without being asked. The way she quietly solved problems before anyone else even realized they existed. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Richard returned home later than usual. The mansion was quiet. Most of the staff had already finished their duties. As he walked through the western hallway, he noticed a light glowing beneath a partially open door. Curious, he stepped closer. Inside was a modest sitting room rarely used by guests. Vanessa sat beside an elderly woman wrapped in a blanket. A cup of tea rested on a nearby table. The woman looked tired but peaceful as Vanessa adjusted her pillow and smiled gently. Richard immediately recognized her. It was Vanessa's mother. Months earlier, he had approved a temporary arrangement allowing her to stay in a small guest cottage on the property while recovering from health complications. He had nearly forgotten about it. Vanessa had never mentioned it. Never asked for special treatment. Never complained about the extra responsibility. Richard stepped away before they noticed him, but the image remained in his mind. The next morning, curiosity led him to review Vanessa's employment file. What he discovered surprised him. Years earlier, she had earned a degree in education. Several promising career opportunities had been available to her. Yet she had turned them down one after another. The reason appeared in a brief note attached to an old application. Family caregiving responsibilities. Richard leaned back in his chair. Suddenly many things made sense. The patience. The empathy. The ability to make Maya feel understood. These qualities had not appeared by accident. They had been shaped through years of sacrifice. Later that week, Maya and Vanessa spent the afternoon planting flowers near the garden path behind the estate. The air carried the scent of fallen leaves and fresh soil. Richard watched from a nearby terrace. Maya was talking enthusiastically about a book she had recently finished while Vanessa listened with genuine interest. At one point, Maya asked a question. "Did you always want to work in a big house?" Vanessa laughed softly. "Not exactly." Maya tilted her head. "Then why do you?" Vanessa considered her answer carefully. "Because sometimes life takes you somewhere different than you planned. But that does not mean you stop trying to make a difference where you are." Maya nodded as though the answer made perfect sense. Richard felt something shift inside him. For years, he had measured success through numbers, acquisitions, and achievements. Vanessa measured success differently. Through kindness. Through presence. Through the lives she improved every day without expecting recognition. That evening, Maya proudly carried a small flower pot into the dining room. Inside grew a single bright yellow bloom. She placed it in the center of the table. "This one is for Vanessa," she announced. "Why?" Richard asked. Maya smiled. "Because she helps everything grow." Richard looked toward Vanessa standing nearby. For a moment their eyes met. She seemed slightly embarrassed by the attention. Yet Richard understood exactly what Maya meant. The little girl had seen something long before anyone else. Beneath the housekeeping uniform and quiet routine was a woman whose kindness had been changing lives for years. The only difference now was that someone had finally noticed. The trouble began on a gray November morning when Richard arrived at the estate earlier than usual and sensed tension the moment he stepped through the front doors. Conversations stopped when he entered certain rooms. Employees exchanged uneasy glances. Something had changed. Later that afternoon, during a routine meeting with senior household staff, the source of the tension finally emerged. Eleanor Whitmore, the estate's longtime operations manager, presented a proposal regarding staffing adjustments for the coming year. Her recommendations seemed ordinary until one name appeared on the list. Vanessa Carter. Richard looked up immediately. "What is this?" he asked. Eleanor folded her hands neatly on the conference table. "Several concerns have been raised regarding professional boundaries," she replied carefully. "Some members of the household staff believe Miss Carter's role has become unclear." Richard remained silent. Eleanor continued. "The child has become unusually attached. We believe it may be healthier to transition her care toward trained professionals." The room grew quiet. Richard understood the message hidden beneath the polished language. Vanessa was not being judged because she had failed. She was being judged because she mattered too much. That evening, rain drifted softly against the mansion windows while Vanessa worked in the library. She had not yet heard about the discussion. Maya sat nearby building a miniature city from wooden blocks. Every few minutes she proudly pointed out a new building. Vanessa admired each one as though it were a masterpiece. The simple scene felt peaceful. Yet outside the room decisions were already forming that could change everything. 2 days later, Maya accidentally overheard part of a conversation between staff members in the hallway. She was searching for a missing sketchbook when she heard Vanessa's name. Curious, she paused near the corner. "The transition will probably happen before Christmas," one employee said quietly. "It is unfortunate, but management thinks it is necessary." Maya felt her stomach tighten. Another voice answered. "The girl will be upset at first, but children adjust." The words echoed inside her mind long after the conversation ended. That night, she barely touched her dinner. Richard noticed immediately. "Is something wrong?" he asked gently. Maya looked down at her plate. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Is Vanessa leaving?" The question struck the room like a sudden storm. Richard stared at her in surprise. Across the table, even Vanessa looked shocked. "Why would you think that?" Richard asked. Maya hesitated before answering. "Because people keep talking about it." Silence followed. Richard glanced toward Vanessa. She looked equally confused. Clearly, nobody had informed her about the proposal. For the first time, Richard felt deeply unsettled by what was happening behind the scenes. After dinner, Maya sat alone in the sunroom overlooking the dark gardens. Rain shimmered beneath outdoor lanterns. Vanessa eventually joined her, carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. One was topped with extra marshmallows exactly the way Maya liked it. The little girl accepted the cup but remained unusually quiet. Finally she looked up. "If they ask you to leave, will you go?" Vanessa's heart sank. She carefully set down her drink. "Nobody has asked me to leave." "But if they do?" Maya insisted. Vanessa smiled gently, though sadness touched her eyes. "Then I will always be grateful for knowing you." Maya lowered her gaze. Outside, the rain continued falling. Inside, a fear neither of them had expected was beginning to grow. And for the first time since Maya arrived at the estate, the place that had finally started feeling like home no longer felt completely safe. The following Monday, Richard called a meeting in the estate's main conference room. Long windows overlooked the gray November gardens, while a steady rain drifted across the glass. Around the polished table sat senior household staff, department managers, and several advisors who oversaw the daily operations of the property. Vanessa had been asked to attend, though nobody had explained why. She sat quietly near the end of the table, feeling more uncomfortable with every passing minute. Maya was supposed to be at her tutoring session upstairs. At least that was what everyone believed. Eleanor Whitmore stood and began reviewing her recommendations. Her voice remained calm and professional. She spoke about organizational efficiency, role clarity, and long-term staffing objectives. Eventually the conversation returned to the same proposal that had caused so much concern. A transition plan. A gradual separation of responsibilities. New childcare professionals. Different routines. Different schedules. Different people. Richard listened carefully. Several others nodded in agreement. On paper, the proposal sounded reasonable. Yet something about it felt completely wrong. Before he could respond, the conference room door suddenly opened. Every head turned. Maya stood in the doorway. Her school notebook was tucked under one arm. Her expression was determined. Nobody had expected her to be there. Richard immediately rose from his chair. "Maya, sweetheart, this is a private meeting." Normally she would have apologized and left. This time she remained exactly where she was. "I know what you are talking about," she said softly. The room became silent. Richard exchanged a glance with Vanessa. Neither knew what would happen next. Maya stepped into the room. "You want Vanessa to stop taking care of me." Eleanor shifted uncomfortably. "Maya, this discussion is about procedures." The little girl shook her head. "No, it is about her." Her voice was not angry. It was honest. And somehow that made every word more powerful. Maya looked around the table at all the adults. When I first came here, everybody was nice to me. She paused. But they were nice because they were supposed to be. No one spoke. Vanessa was different. Maya's eyes filled slightly with emotion. She talked to me when nobody was watching. She listened when I was sad. She never treated me like I was a problem that needed fixing. The room remained completely still. Even the sound of rain seemed distant now. Maya continued. Everybody keeps saying what is best for me. But nobody asked me. Her gaze found Richard's. Do you know why I chose her? Richard swallowed slowly. Why? Maya smiled through her tears. Because when I walked into this house I felt alone. And she was the only person who made me feel like I belonged here. Vanessa lowered her eyes. She could no longer hide the emotion on her face. Across the table, several staff members looked away quietly. Maya took a deep breath. People think she is just helping me. But she is the reason I smile when I wake up. She is the reason this house feels like home. For several seconds nobody said a word. Then Richard looked around the room. The proposal sitting before him suddenly seemed very small compared to the truth they had just heard. And in that moment, a 7-year-old girl had done something none of the adults had managed to do. She had reminded everyone that the most important things in life could never be measured by titles, positions, or job descriptions. The meeting ended differently than anyone expected. One by one, people gathered their notes and quietly left the conference room. The rain continued tapping against the windows, but something inside the estate had changed. Maya's words lingered long after she had returned upstairs. Richard remained seated alone at the table for several minutes, staring at the proposal that had nearly altered the course of all their lives. The document was detailed, professional, logical, yet now it seemed strangely disconnected from reality. Numbers, schedules, and organizational charts could explain many things. They could not explain why. Lonely child had found comfort in a woman everyone else had overlooked. Later that evening, Richard asked Vanessa to join him in the library. The room glowed with the warm light of the fireplace while Manhattan's skyline shimmered beyond the tall windows. Vanessa arrived expecting a discussion about the meeting. Instead, Richard surprised her. I owe you an apology, he said. Vanessa looked confused. For what? Richard folded his hands thoughtfully. For seeing your position before seeing your value. Silence settled between them. Vanessa had spent years working in homes where wealthy people rarely looked beyond titles and responsibilities. Hearing those words felt unexpected. Richard continued. I kept asking why Maya trusted you. The truth is, I was asking the wrong question. Vanessa listened quietly. What was the right question? Richard smiled faintly. Why did it take the rest of us so long to see what she saw immediately? For a moment neither spoke. The fire crackled softly nearby. Finally, Vanessa looked down at her hands. She is a remarkable little girl. Richard nodded. She is. But she is also right. Those words carried more weight than either of them expected. Over the following days, small changes began appearing throughout the estate. Staff members who had rarely spoken to Vanessa now greeted her warmly. Invitations to planning discussions suddenly included her name. Employees who once viewed her only as part of the housekeeping department started recognizing the role she played in the life of the household. Yet the biggest change occurred in Richard himself. He began spending more time at home. More dinners. More evenings in the library. More walks through the gardens with Maya and Vanessa. The mansion no longer felt like a place he merely owned. It was becoming a place he wanted to belong. One Saturday afternoon, the three of them visited a community holiday festival in Central Park. Children skated across the ice rink while musicians performed beneath strings of golden lights. Maya laughed as she attempted to decorate a gingerbread house at a charity booth. Vanessa stood nearby smiling while Richard watched the scene unfold. At one point, Maya ran ahead to join a group activity, leaving the two adults alone for a moment. Richard glanced toward Vanessa. You changed everything here, he said quietly. Vanessa shook her head. No. Maya did. Richard looked toward the little girl in the distance. Then he smiled. Maybe both of you did. Nearby, Maya turned and waved enthusiastically for them to join her. Without hesitation, they walked toward her together. And as the winter lights reflected across the park, Richard finally understood what Maya had been trying to tell everyone from the beginning. The person who mattered most was never the one with the most impressive title. It was the one who made other people feel loved. Winter slowly gave way to spring. The last traces of snow disappeared from the gardens surrounding the Harrington estate, replaced by fresh green grass and rows of colorful flowers blooming beneath the morning sun. Months had passed since the meeting that changed everything. The mansion still stood as grand as ever, but it no longer felt cold. Laughter now drifted through hallways that had once been silent. Family dinners lasted longer. Weekends felt warmer. And for the first time in many years the house felt alive. Maya flourished. Her confidence grew with every passing week. She excelled in school, made new friends and filled sketchbooks with drawings that decorated nearly every room in the estate. Whenever guests visited, they noticed the same thing immediately. The little girl seemed happy, truly happy. And when they asked Richard what had changed, his answer was always the same. People matter more than plans. One bright Saturday afternoon, the estate hosted a small garden celebration for employees, neighbors, and community organizations the family supported. Long tables were decorated with flowers. Children played games on the lawn. Music drifted through the air while guests enjoyed the beautiful weather. Maya moved excitedly between groups, greeting everyone she knew. Vanessa stood near the flower garden helping organize refreshments. As usual, she worked quietly without expecting attention. Then Maya climbed onto a small platform near the center of the lawn and tapped a spoon against a glass. The gathering gradually fell silent. Richard smiled immediately. He recognized that look on her face. It meant she had already decided what she wanted to say. Maya looked out at the crowd. "Thank you for coming," she began. Several guests applauded. Then she continued. "When I first came here, I thought I was alone. The garden became completely quiet. Maya searched the crowd until she found Vanessa. Then I met someone who changed everything." Vanessa immediately looked embarrassed. Maya smiled. "Everybody kept telling me how lucky I was because I lived in a big house. But the best thing that happened to me was finding someone who made it feel like a home." Many guests glanced toward Vanessa and began smiling. Tears appeared in her eyes before she could stop them. Maya stepped down from the platform and walked directly toward her. Then she wrapped her arms around Vanessa in a long embrace. The applause that followed spread across the entire garden. Richard felt emotion rise in his chest as he watched the scene. A few minutes later, as the celebration continued around them, he joined Vanessa near the flower beds. For a moment they simply stood together watching Maya laugh with friends beneath the afternoon sun. "She was right all along," Richard said quietly. Vanessa looked at him. "About what?" He smiled. "About seeing people for who they are." The breeze carried the scent of fresh flowers through the garden. Maya looked back toward them and waved enthusiastically. Without thinking, both waved back at the same time. The little girl grinned as though she had just witnessed the ending she always hoped for. And standing there beneath the spring sunshine, surrounded by laughter, friendship, and belonging, they all understood the same simple truth. Family is not always the people who arrive together. Sometimes it is the people who choose to stay.